Hello, everyone, and welcome back to part two of my Mormon Stories interview with Tim Birt. Tim Birt is a licensed professional counselor and licensed marriage and family therapist. He has a ton of experience dealing with abuse and childhood abuse, and you can go to his preamble in the first episode to hear all his experiences and credentials. We just spent a good hour and 20 minutes talking about LDS policies and teachings and how they can be harmful and helpful. Now we're going to turn to a blog post that you recently made. I believe it was on Natasha Helfer Parker's blog. Is that right?
Yes, Natasha was kind enough to host that blog post on her site, and it's basically called "How the Church Approaches Abuse: A Professional Response." Because recently, here in 2018, the LDS Church put out a resource on its Mormon newsroom for professionals and for the public and for the media, entitled "How the Church Approaches Abuse." It's also called "How Mormons Approach Abuse." It's got two different titles. One of them, but this is a response to that.
Okay, and basically, what did the church claim?
Well, the church claims a number of things, and actually I like portions of what the church says here, and I think it's wonderful. And I start off by saying basically that that this is a bold statement, and it basically commits them to do a number of things that I think are really good, and I'd like to hold them to it. And in that mind, I'd like to offer the following assessments and recommendations. The church says in one place is that one victim is too many. And it says that we're totally against abuse, and we're gonna work to, first of all, protect the victim and stop the abuse from occurring. And so that's their first priority, is what they say, and that's really good. Their first priority is to help the victim and stop the abuse. They also say that on page 2 here, it says that child abuse is an evil practice, that we don't condone it, that we don't tolerate it. We have a zero tolerance policy, and which are all good. They quote some of the Savior's teachings and really try to make an emphatic statement that we're not for abuse. They also make some pretty bold claims here, and those are the ones I'm kind of reacting to. Now, I'm all in favor of all this, and I'd love to hold the church to this. They say here that as we learn of ways to more effectively decrease the potential for abuse, we implement them. So I want to hold them to that. They say this 3 or 4 times in different ways in this article. That they also make some claim that says that it says that we've changed in society and we've learned more and we're growing and we're not perfect. But they said that as awareness of this scourge has grown in society, the church has been at the forefront of efforts to combat that. No system, later on they say, no system is perfect or flawless, but the church works tirelessly to prevent the abuse of children and constantly strives to improve in these areas. Then here's the statement that's the zinger. We are unaware of any organization that does more than the church to stop and prevent abuse. So, I think that it's fair, if that's their perspective, to point out if they want to say, hey, if they find out new ways, they're going to implement them. Well, let's talk about some other ways that other people are doing this and ways that they may be coming up short.
All right. So you put together a blog post that has 16 points that responds to the church's statement. Is that right?
Yeah.
All right. So let's go with each one, and let's just go through them.
Okay, so the first one I say is that the church does not follow basic youth protection standards, even the standards accepted from Boy Scouts of America. And other youth-serving organizations, many organizations have that, because it mandates that and allows bishops and church leaders to meet one-on-one with youth behind closed doors, and even more importantly, discuss sexual matters. So basic youth protection policies that we have in Boy Scouts of America and many other youth-serving organizations and churches do not allow one-on-one behind closed doors meeting between an adult and a child, and especially don't involve sexual issues about sexuality. Now, I haven't surveyed every church in the country, but there are some who are claiming that we're one of the only churches that does that.
Okay. So, so just to start with, one-on-one, end it, right? Because nobody else does it. Not even the Boy Scouts do it, and we're not doing it.
Yeah, we do one-on-one meetings with youth and bishops, and we actually mandate that happen. It says that bishops are encouraged to interview their youth on a regular basis, and so that's it. The second one.
So just to summarize, so the church can't claim that it does more than anyone and is safer than anyone when it's doing a basic level practice that everyone knows is a no-no, and they're doing it anyway.
Yeah.
So end one-on-one child and youth interviews behind closed doors.
Right.
All right. That's number one. What's number two?
Number one. The church does not perform any background checks of its own of adult leaders assigned to work with children, or youth background checks for bishops, counselors, or stake leaders who interview children alone.
And I'm just going to say, I went to South Mountain, Community Church in Draper, Utah. They showed me all these volunteer child workers, and they made it a point to say everyone had received a background check.
Yeah. Community of Christ does it. Many churches do it. You have to have a background
Universalists, it's just basic
absolutely.
practice.
Absolutely. Basic
Why
practice.
in the world would the church not do background checks? Any idea?
Don't know.
Is it just lazy? Is it cheap?
Well, part of the thing is that, we've got lots of resources in the church. We do all kinds of things. We can figure out where people live and, call people up and get them to go do a massive project in a few minutes. So we're organized here. So we should be able to do this. But we have lots and lots and lots of members who are called to work with children. And from primary workers to nursery workers to young men's workers to Boy Scouts people to bishops to stake leaders and so forth. There's lots of people who work with children. So that would require us basically, and people change callings all the time. It would basically require us to almost do background checks on everybody. And so, but many churches do it. I mean, I was talking to John Hamer about the Community of Christ, and he says, we do that. One of the problems is it takes a while to get people through not only the background checks, but the training. And so it's harder to get youth service workers, but our children deserve it.
Absolutely.
And one other point I wanted to make on this is that church does participate in the Boy Scout program. We'll talk about the Boy Scout program problem in a minute. But the church does have the Boy Scouts have background checks on people, and the charter organization rep from the ward has to sign off on the application to say this person's okay. But the church doesn't get those results back from the BSA. The church doesn't get those results back. And so we don't even do background checks, I don't believe, on bishops. Now, I've heard through the grapevine that somewhere in the United States, maybe they're starting to do this, but it hasn't hit here, and that's not in the media yet. So if that is something the church is starting to do, good for them, but they need to do it.
So do background checks, number two.
Yep, number two.
All right, number three.
Okay, so no standard... the church has no standardized youth protection training for adults or workers with working with children. So these other churches and even the BSA, when you want to sign up for the BSA, you have to go through the youth protection, child safety piece. You have to go through it online, answer the right questions, and you have to print out a copy of your youth protection thing before it goes with your application. Okay, so many other organizations have much more robust training, and they actually have policies that you read and sign and say you're going to agree to, and that you watch for other people in the church following them. So we have no standardized training or no standardized policies for adults working with children.
All right. That's number three. Get a standardized protection training for adults working with children.
Right. And have some process to monitor whether that's happening on a regular basis. Some churches say you have to take it every 3 years or every 2 years, and also have some policies. The policies are available so everybody knows what they are and what to do if you see someone else. Part of the Boy Scout training is there's a little vignette in the video that shows an adult leader for the second time trying to go take a kid, to show them something off in the woods. And then one person goes up there and says, hey, no, that's not okay. I've told you this once, and so, yeah, we need to have a process to be able to monitor whether we're following it.
They should have training for kids to say, this is what abuse is, and this is how to deal with it if you've been abused. But I'm just struck by, when the church really cares about something, let's just say same-sex marriage, they'll marshal recruits, they'll spend, tens of millions of dollars, they'll file amicus briefs, they'll lobby at state and national legislatures, they'll ask members to like picket and canvass door to door. Like, we've seen through the church's opposition to same-sex marriage what they do when they really care about something. And it's kind of making me mad, because if the church really cared about these children and the abuse that's clearly happening, you would think that they would apply the same types of efforts. And they're not only are they not applying apparently the same types of efforts, they're neglecting even the base level of protections that any vanilla Christian or scouting organization has as a default. And it just makes you wonder, what in the crap are they doing? I'm not going to say they don't care about children, but it's mind-boggling to me a little bit.
Well, it's mind-boggling that they make a point that says that they know of no other organization that does more. Because, in my blog, I said that's patently false. And
it's kind of insulting. It's kind of insulting.
That's hard words, but from my witness, it's true. Now, I will say this, that there are some stakes, there are some wards, there are some things that are doing some of these things. And in fact, mine does. Mine is some of the good guys. They're actually doing many of these things, but it's not across the board. My people are not doing, they have parents in the room for under 12. They're asking for another adult in the room for over 12. They're getting a little pushback from some kids who says, I don't want another person in the room. But some of these people are trying to do it, but it's not across the board. And so we'll talk about in a minute what we can do at a local level to encourage this. But I'm not going to say that there's no places in the church that some of these things aren't working. But it's not across the board. It's not standard. It's not coming out in general conference or on the new handbook of instructions that's available to every member of the church. And when you get a calling, you're asked to sign off on it, just like in a personnel manual, like you do in other churches. It's not out there.
Yeah. Melissa writes, I'd laugh if that wasn't so sad. And Chad writes, has the church ditched the Boy Scouts of America in part due to the effort and expense of child protective measures? Now, that's interesting. Go ahead.
I'm going to address the Boy Scout one a little bit later. Let me pick it up right now for that concept. So the church has not ditched the Boy Scouts. So what the church did as of January 1st of 2018 is it said it would no longer charter venture crews. Now, venture crews are available to anybody 13 or older of either gender. Now, the church has never allowed girls to have a venture crew that the church employs. But basically it's saying that it's not going to charter venture crews any longer, and it's not going to require boys that are over 14 or 14 and above, teachers and priests, to be part of the Boy Scouts. Now, they can in most areas, and like in my area, we're signing everybody up that wants to. But the problem is, and I'll skip to this point when I get to it later, is that now we're having this new young men's program for the older scouts. And now they're supposed to come up with all these high adventure things and so forth. So the problem is we don't have any youth protection from the Boy Scouts anymore. No background checks for the people that are in Boy Scouts that are just working with a young men's leader. And also we'd have no guide to safe scouting, no safety afloat, no, all the protections that are built into the Boy Scouts of America from years and years and years of problems where they said, okay, this was bad. We're going to train people on this now so somebody doesn't die anymore. So the Boy Scouts is, they have problems in their organization some, but I'm a big scouter and I think they're doing a lot of good, and their youth protection things, they've come a long way, and they're actually a model organization now. But we've given up all that now with the older boys that aren't on a scout trip. And so, yeah, we don't require that for boys 14 to 18 anymore. And we don't have a problem. We don't have a program. Where is it?
We're losing an important protection that we used to have.
We used to. And what I'm saying is let's charter venture crews and keep kids in Boy Scouts until the church can come up with its own safe guide to safe scouting, its own, ways to do background checks, its own ways to, support, high adventure programs and stuff like that. And so when we get to that point later on, I'll
Okay,
make the
we'll
other
talk
points.
about it. All right, so what's your next point in your?
Okay, next point is the LDS Church claims to have a too deep leadership policy for male adults working with youth and for youth activities. But the policy is not widely known or not followed rigorously, nor is there any monitoring program established to report or corrected breaches in this policy. And this policy does not uniformly apply to women with youth or bishops or leaders. And also in nursery, there's a policy that says if there's a man involved, there has to be 2 adults in the room. But it doesn't say that for women. So this too deep leadership thing is for youth activities, but it may be out there, but I don't know of a uniform standard that trains that and requires it. We don't have a process to say, oh, wait, this kid needed a ride home and there's nobody there. And so the young men's director gave him a ride home. Wait a minute, that wasn't right. How do we fix that? There's no reporting mechanism to say, whoops, that was a close call. We had to do something to figure that out. So it says that they want to do a too deep leadership, which they're trying to do, but it's not uniformly done, and it's definitely not done with bishops. And that's this thing with we're only worried about men as your nursery leaders. It's not there.
All right.
Okay. The next one is there's no uniform training that exists for bishops and stake presidents on reporting abuse, maintaining confidentiality, or boundaries on counseling or understanding child abuse and trauma. So we don't have, that I know of, an official training program for bishops and counselors and stake leaders that do this. They're not trained necessarily on mandated reporting. Now, in my stake, they are, because we have people in our stake who know what they're doing. They're training everybody, and they're doing a good job. But it's not uniform across the church. And if it were, if there is something uniform across the church, it's not publicly available for us to look at it. And also about boundaries on counseling. In my stake, they're saying, don't talk to, about sexuality. Don't teach about sexuality. It's for the parents. That's really good stuff. But, we have a lot of bishops who are saying, well, do you masturbate? It's not in the handbook anymore, but they're saying that. And then the kid says, well, what's masturbation? And then that's the first place they learn what masturbation is. And also on counseling, you're not a counselor. You shouldn't do counseling if you're a bishop.
I think the church views bishops as counselors, doesn't it?
Well, spiritual counselors, yeah. But, are they really counselors that are prepared to really deal with marital issues? Are they really able to deal with sexual issues? Are they really able to deal with issues of, financial planning?
Okay. So I would guess the general authorities would say, yeah, these are men entitled to the Spirit of the Lord. These are men that have experience. They're called of God, and they can absolutely provide counsel as it relates to marriage because they have the scriptures. They have the Holy Ghost, and they can absolutely provide counsel about sexuality, about marriage, about personal spirituality and righteousness, about happy, healthy living. What would your response be if a general authority made that claim to you?
Well, I went to a lot of school to learn how to do this, and no. The idea is that you're not good at providing marriage therapy unless you're trained in it. Unless you're trained in doing this. Now you can certainly say, hey, the person comes in and they're saying, I have this problem with my spouse and I'd like you to listen, Bishop. They can listen, but they're not really trained to say, well, how do you want to handle it? They're likely to pull out the scriptures and say, you know what, marriage is ordained of God. And, you need to stick with that. And as soon as they say that, they're out of their depth. They're out of their depth. Got it. And they're likely to harm people. They really are. And if you read Sam Young's, stories, I mean, there are lots and lots of stories out there of bishops, that are giving bad advice for people. And the Holy Spirit, you have, it's a bishop's roulette. If they had such discernment that they knew from the Lord what was right and what's wrong, they don't need to do interviews. They'll know. They'll know if you're worthy or not. The Lord will tell them. Now, it's a whole different thing if you want the person to say, hey, I'd like you to assess yourself. I already know because the Lord told me, but I'd like you to assess yourself. Okay, there you go. But yeah.
Got it. Okay. All right. What's the next point?
Okay, the next one is, as evidenced by the stories of Sam Young, the church has an extensive problem with inappropriate and abusive behavior by church leaders toward youth. And it's historical, and I believe it's going on now. The church is not reaching out to acknowledge, much less to address this problem. So part of the thing that I think we need is like a truth and reconciliation thing, like what they had in South Africa. I went to South Africa on my mission. I went before apartheid came apart. And, Mandela and some of those people did a wonderful thing to be able to say, you can come and speak your truth. We'll listen. So part of the church says it's in its article that it's against abuse and zero tolerance, and we're going to help everything we can to, but they won't publicly say, yeah, there's a problem. And they won't, it doesn't seem like there's active efforts to seek, every one of those stories of Sam Young. I mean, they should have a committee put together to say, hey, how can we help you? What can we do? We messed up. Someone messed up here. What can we do about this? What lessons can we learn? I'd love to see the church do that.
Now, part of the problem is Donald H. Oakes, who has more power, not less, now in the church, as of the recent changes where Russell M. Nelson became president. He made Donald H. Oakes first counselor in the first presidency. Donald H. Oakes is on record as saying, we don't apologize. We neither seek nor give apologies. So the church doesn't have a good track record on reconciliation. And that makes that hard.
I mean, that's sad. I mean, it's not consistent with articles of faith. Faith, repentance. You got to repent. You got to make restitution. We look at what the Catholic Church and other churches have gone through. Some of these organizations who have made mistakes are trying to, follow up and make restitution. And I'm not going to comment. I'm not an expert on the Catholics or so forth. But we clearly can do better. And if the church is saying in this recent statement, when we learn of processes to more effectively protect our children and to address abuse, we do them. Well, here's one you can do.
Right. Yeah. So the church needs to train its leaders better or teach its leaders the limits of their expertise so that they can refer their members to the appropriate support, and then also acknowledge that there's been a big problem.
Yeah.
Repent, follow the steps of repentance itself as an organization, which means confessing, making restitution, and forsaking the sin, and addressing the problem. Okay, what's next?
Next is the church does not have a panel of child abuse professionals and victims of abuse advising its policies and helping the church to address past mistakes and trauma inflicted by church leaders on children and adults. So that's one of the best practices, is to say, okay, we may not be the best people to set our own policies. If we've hurt people, we need to have some experts from the field come in and say, hey, can you take a look at what we're doing? Can we see if there's a better way to do this? And we need authentic voices. People who have experienced this to be there and say, hey, this would have prevented me this trauma that I went through. This would have made it possible for you guys to have reported abuse. This would have stopped this bishop from molesting me. Authentic voices and professionals in the field. There's lots of organizations. The church wants to ask me. I can give you names. I can give you organizations. It needs that kind of a blue ribbon panel from outside the church to be able to assess its policies.
I guess in theory it's possible it has that type of committee at corporate headquarters. Yeah.
It may, but the thing is, if it does, I think that it would be really good for when the Blue Ribbon Committee comes through and makes recommendations, that they make them public. But what would it be like if in the church news they said, hey, wow, we realized we've had some of these big problems, and this is what we're doing to address them. These are new policies we're coming out with. And here's what the Blue Ribbon panel says we need to do, and here's the process we're going to go to help these people, and maybe put some stories of what happened and how we're addressing it. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we do that?
I almost feel like the church is kind of too much run by lawyers, because to put together a committee is to admit there's a problem, and to admit that there's a problem maybe makes the church liable for, lawsuits. And so it just seems like the church runs in the other way and says, we're the best in the world. Nobody's better than us. It's almost a little bit like some political leaders we know who just sort of react in an extreme way that really flies in the face of reality.
Well, lawsuits is, one thing that, part of what I want to do this is I care about the children in the church, and I want the church to get better. I'm not trying to just attack and tear down the church. I really want them to get better. I care about these kids. I care about, myself when I was growing up the church, I care about these. And so it's important to do this stuff. And lawsuits lawsuits really made a difference to the Catholic Church. Lawsuits, unfortunately, maybe, and the church obviously fears lawsuits. You can see that from the November policies, November 2015 policies, which many of us believe were, had some legality basis on it, why they did what they did. And so I think the church really does fear that. And so, they can get sued a lot. When church bishops don't report abuse, they can get held civilly and criminally liable. When bishops, release confidential information, they can be civilly liable, and people are going to start suing them. And I hope that the church doesn't do things that they deserve to get sued about, but sometimes legal action, is how people, bring organizations to change.
Right. Everyone hates lawyers until they need one, right? Okay, so the church needs to put together a blue ribbon panel of professionals and victims to help guide its policies. All right, next point.
The next point comes to the professional helpline. That helpline is good that they have it there because, it is really difficult to explain to bishops all the different things. Now, they should be trained a lot more, but they could have somebody to call. But one of the things it says about the helpline is call the helpline first. Now, one of the things we learn in reporting child abuse is that you're responsible to report that abuse personally. And you don't get off the hook civilly from being sued by passing it on to somebody else. So, you call the hotline, the bishop calls the hotline, they say, don't report abuse. You don't report it. And then they sue you. Bishop, you're still on the line. You can get sued. And the church gets sued too. And so the other concern is, there are many reports out there that the helpline, really protects the church interests and not the children's. Now, in their policy that they just released, their article, the resource on Mormon Newsroom, they say that, that our first priority is to protect the victim and to stop the abuse. And so if they're true, okay, it needs to be that. But we need to see some evidence about that, and maybe there needs to be a victim's hotline that they can call, so that, hey, my bishop's doing this bad stuff to me. How can I, what can I do about that? Anyway.
There absolutely should be a victim hotline, not just protect the church's, assets hotline.
Right.
Absolutely.
So the next one, number 9, is that they do talk in their article, which I appreciate. They said since 2006, any new buildings are being built with windows on classrooms so that people can see in, and then old buildings are being retrofit, and so that's good. I think that windows need to be put into almost all the windows.
By the way, at South Mountain Community Church, every room that had kids in it had just a glass. It was a door with glass. So you see right through it, right? Every single room with children. Right.
And some of the child protective policies will hopefully you'll link through in the bottom of this. We want to give examples of other churches that, their programs so that people can look and see. And some of those say that, if you're, around a child, you have to have the doors open. You can't be around even a closed door. So what I'm saying is that the bishop's office needs windows too. Any place that they're going to have youth, behind a closed door needs a window. And it's better to not have people, especially one-on-one, behind a closed door.
Now I was thinking about that. If somebody's with the bishop and they're talking about something, even a kid with their parent and the bishop, if someone can walk through and see the person crying, or they can see the bishop, is that a violation of privacy to have people being able to watch a bishop? What if a bishop's counseling a married couple and they're fighting, and you can look in and see the couple fighting as the bishop's counseling them? I just thought that might be problematic a little bit.
Well, right, but many of the bishop's doors right now have peepholes in them anyway. So If you want to stand there and look in the peephole, you can see that right now already. There is a point about that kind of a situation. I think it's a whole different thing when you're counseling, two adults behind closed doors. But if we understood that, the bishop and people are going to do, serious stuff, I'm open to what you're saying, and I think there needs to be give and take on all these things. The whole idea is, though, we want to make it sure it's better that we don't have bishops and children alone behind closed doors, and we're not doing youth interviews, so we don't have to worry about that. The bishops there's never a kid behind there anyway, so it'd be better.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it could even have a shade that it could open or close. If it's adults, close it. But if it's a kid, keep it open, right?
Yeah, that's possible, but part of the problem is we've seen some churches, we've had reports of, they put these windows in, and then people are putting stuff over the windows.
Okay.
So that they don't get seen. So that one I'm open to discussion about. All these things are a matter of dialogue. And if we had a dialogue back and forth with child abuse professionals and with victims and with the church and trying to come up with the right thing, that's good. And and if the church and all those people say, hey, this is a bit of a problem, you didn't think about this. Yeah, good. Okay, we didn't think about that, but let's have a dialogue.
Absolutely. Okay, number 10.
Good. Number 10, the LDS teachings of past leaders have implicated victims as responsible for their abuse and encouraged members that it would be better to lose their lives than being a victim of abuse, of rape. These kind of teachings have not been formally dismissed or disavowed. We're kind of quietly phasing out, giving everybody who had a sexual problem a copy of the Miracle for Forgiveness, or giving them that Lust or Love talk by Spencer Kimball. But we really need, I believe, to state what we believe in now and say, almost like they did with blacks in the priesthood, that we disavow some of these harmful teachings of the past. We do. I mean, that Lust versus Love is still referenced as one of the references on LDS.org for how to, resources for parents with teens, and it talks about masturbation in there, and it talks about, in some of those talks, it talks about, LGBT people being, that it's a choice. And they talk about, this whole thing that, it's better for you to die than to lose, to be raped. We just got to disavow that stuff.
Yeah, because it seems like what the church often does is, if it doesn't like a book or an old ensign or a conference talk, it may, get rid of it or mothball it or delete it or stop publishing the book. But that doesn't mean that for the next 40 or 50 years, lessons that people remember, teachings and policies that people picked up from their leaders or from their experiences or from their parents or their family meetings, that those things don't persist in the minds and the hearts of the members. And so unless you formally say, here's what the doctrine is, here's what the doctrine isn't, here are the teachings that are helpful, here are the teachings that are harmful. Yeah. If they don't persist written, they'll still persist orally, right? In the oral traditions, right?
Right.
And in the books of the people, in the bookshelves of the people at home, or the ensigns that the people have. Yeah. So the church has to be proactive about educating, not just quietly shelf and mothball stuff if they don't like it anymore.
Right. And I think this is a proactive effort, that we have to realize that, these statements and attitudes of the past were harmful, and we don't believe them anymore. We don't teach them anymore. And this is why they're harmful. And that takes courage. It takes courage for us to learn, that we learn line upon line, and the church, we're learning and growing. We're progressing, and we need to be able to admit that. Now, back on the window thing, there are some congregations and stakes at doing it. My stake is trying to put a window in every bishop's office. So there are people that are out there trying to do this on our own side. So not everybody's bad guys. Some of the people are really trying to do this, even without the general church's approval. And I applaud that. And Sam applauds that. We're all good on those that do that. So those are the heroes.
Okay. So to close this point, the church needs to be explicit about what is and isn't doctrine, get rid of all the harmful teachings, harmful books, harmful ensign articles, harmful messages, harmful general conference talks, and make people know what is and isn't doctrine around these matters.
Absolutely.
Okay, number 11.
The next one, the church seems to actually to be taking actions that actively resist changing its policies on one-on-one, closed door interviews, and about youth and sexual matters. It's, it's resisted calls to find alternative methods. It issued this policy, with Sam, basically says that, basically bishops are going to keep doing that, and they're going to ask whatever they're inspired to do.
And don't forget how the church tried to lobby the Utah State Legislature to make it illegal for someone being interviewed by a bishop to record the interview, so that bishops and stake presidents can't be held accountable for what they say. That's moving in the wrong direction. We want more transparency and accountability. We don't want to be moving the direction of protecting the power structure against potential victims. That's crazy.
Right. So the church should be setting the example of listening to members and children who've had problems, and actively say, oh, wow, there's a problem. We want to know. We're actively listening. We're seeking out that. We're going to find out what's happening here. We're going to listen to what you have to say. That's protecting victims. The church in its policy here, its resource says it's doing that, but we need to do it. We need to see it. We need to see it. We need to, take Sam and every one of those stories, see how we can help, and ask, what was, there's a general call from the church, anyone had bad feelings and experiences with this kind of stuff, let us know. Let us figure out how we can help, that would be great.
All right. So stop retrenching and doubling down, move in the direction of fixing the problem, not making it worse.
Right. And church leaders need to read all the stories and ask for more. That would be how we do it.
Yeah. Instead of excommunicating Sam for bringing light, they should actually start their own inquiry to gather these stories, right? Yeah. Okay.
Number 12, the church is not proactively addressing the alienation of LGBTQ youth, addressing youth suicide, mental health challenges of youth that are overwhelmed with shame for teaching on sexuality or sexual orientation, gender, or even these kind of chastity. We're not proactively protecting those youth. This is part about protecting our youth. If we really want to deal with abuse, we really want to protect our children. A child who goes in and says to the bishop, hey, I might be gay. And the bishop says, oh no, you're not, you can't do that. That is very harmful. And we're not reaching and protecting those kids and addressing those kind of issues.
Now I've heard that special bishop training is in the works for LGBT youth.
Good.
But I don't know what it is or when it's being rolled out.
Yeah. Well, we hope for that. We hope for that. And we hope desperately. We hope to also have that openly published of what the training is. So anybody can go online and watch it,
Absolutely.
And so it's not just double secret behind the scenes thing that only the bishops get to see. The handbook of instructions, it's private, it's been leaked, but it's not available. You're not supposed to access it. So even the rules that govern all this stuff are hidden.
Right. Cut out with the secret combinations, right? Make it transparent.
Right.
All right.
The next one is that one about LDS with the youth, with the older 14 to 18. The point that I didn't make on that one is that the church has never applied the BSA youth protection standards of background checks, no one-on-one contact, too deep leadership, sign off from the local congregation, youth training, training for all adult leaders that's done every year or every 2 years. They've never done that for adults working with girls. They've never done it for adults working with primary kids or nursery kids. Now, there is supposedly this too deep leadership, no one-on-one with primary and some primary and some nursery leaders, especially if there's a man involved, but it hasn't done this across the board. So it needs to do that.
So at least make your policies across the board as good as the Boy Scouts policies.
Yep.
All right. Number 14.
The church doesn't provide any bystander training or child safety training for adult members or children.
What's
So
bystander training?
bystander training is a new kind of concept where we teach people to say, hey, let's look out in our environment and see what's happening. It started with the whole sexual assault or physical assault kind of thing, you know, and people making bad comments to other people and sexual harassment, that people were trained what to look for and how to respond. Because sometimes the victim has a hard time responding, or the person that's, you know, in there and says, okay, you know, I'm the nursery leader and this kid had a blowout and I've got to take him and so forth. And, you know, they don't know what to do. So they grab the kid and take him to the restroom or whatever alone. And, you know, there isn't somebody that says, hey, wait, you know, when I was doing that training, it kind of told me that we shouldn't do that. Can we do something else here? Or, you know, somebody who is saying, hey, you know, you're not that kind of what you're talking to the kid about. It's not really how we're supposed to do that. So bystander trainer asks everyone to be part of the solution. You know, we're all agreed into what the solution is. And so we don't do that. We also don't provide any uniform training for youth about what, you know, about child abuse, about, you know, about consent, about respect, about physical abuse, about how to report, about that it's okay, you know, body safety. We don't have any uniform. We have all these training manuals and all these things for lessons for kids. The kids go, say your prayers, pay your tithing, read your scriptures. We hear that, you know, 10,000 times from the time they're, you know, a nursery kid to the time they're 18. How many times do they hear, let's talk about consent. Let's talk about body safety. Let's talk about being able to, you know, deal with that. So there are good programs, and you were talking about the ones that, you know, that they have in other churches. That would be a good thing to do.
Absolutely. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So bystander training so that people know how to see abuse going on elsewhere and how to help it.
Or breaks in policy. You know, it's not just abuse. You know, it's like, you know, yeah, this is not what we're supposed to do with one-on-one. You know, take the kid into the bathroom alone. You know, say, oh, wait, you know, I think we got to think about that. So the next one was number 15 is that there's no formal publicly stated policy or practice to hear, honor, acknowledge, admit problems of teachings and practices. So we don't have a policy on how we're going to handle it. You know, now there is an informal policy. If you have a problem, you talk to the bishop, and if the bishop's the problem, you talk to the stake president. The stake president talks to the general authority. But it isn't publicly available, and it isn't publicly stated. This is our grievance process. This is how you file a grievance against, you know, the bishop or the stake president. You know, and this is the process that gets looked at.
So yeah, so just as you know, the U.S. has a very clear legal structure where lower courts appeal to higher courts, and it's known how laws can get overturned and decisions can be challenged. There needs to be a formal process for handling any problems that might occur, and so often in a patriarchy, just it's hard for anyone to be able to give feedback or have any power or influence, because patriarchies just tend to clamp down and stamp out questions or problems, right?
Right. And in this case, it's really doubly bad, because the people who are investigating the problem are also the people that are responsible for your temple recommend, for your eternal salvation, for your worthiness. They're the common judge in Israel.
Yeah, and that can and I'm sure that the general authorities would say, well, these are good men that aren't trying to hurt anyone, and in theory that's true, but we all know D&C, what is it, 121 about unrighteous
121.
dominion? When someone gets authority, they are
will
inclined
immediately
they
will immediately exhibit unrighteous dominion. Yeah,
and we all have heard stories about bishops that have abused their authority and can, and so there needs to be this channel where people can report, just like at BYU, if the honor code office, you know, if you don't want to report, you know, sexual assault of yourself because you're worried that the honor code office might kick you out of BYU for reporting the assault that happened to you, you know, there needs to be some separate channels so that reporting doesn't influence ongoing status.
Right. Yeah. And policies need to be public. When you look at some of these other churches, their their training, they get a copy of the policy. You read it. You can read it online. You're supposed to sign it before you're allowed to be a youth service worker. You're supposed to sign the policy before you're a bishop. It's publicly available on the website. You can see what the policies are. Members know what standards people are supposed to be held to. And,
exactly.
That's not available here.
That's right. All right. What's your last point?
My last point is that the LDS Church youth protection policies are significantly less comprehensive than the standards of many other churches. And
so the claim that we're better than everyone in the world is just patently false.
It is.
It's kind of egregiously, offensively false.
It's egregiously offensive.
So who does this better? Who does this better?
Almost everybody. Now there are some churches out there that don't have it. In Child Advocacy Center, I can tell you there's some places that don't have their act together, but that statement is not the case. And it says right there, they say, look, when we learn of more effective ways to prevent, not just to deal with, to prevent child abuse, we implement them. Let's hold them to that standard. Church, do it. That's great. That's a great sentiment. I believe it. I support it 100%. But you know what? I'm going to ask John as part of the notes for the show, a bunch of other child protective things. We need to add the Unitarian Universalists to that list. I don't have those down there yet. And we can add more to the list. But just go through. Church leaders just go through all those other things, and members go through them and see. Yeah, there's whatever most other people doing, or the standards in this are there. We're definitely not a model of best practice, and it says that we should be. So let's do it.
I love it. Okay, so those are Timothy Birt's 16 fundamental points of how the church can respond more effectively to abuse and protect children and LGBT people, etc. Mm-hmm. And protect itself and its leaders, right?
Protect itself. That's one of the things that this is just not about protecting children. It's about protecting bishops. A bishop has a hard calling. When they realize they can be sued and go to jail, and that they're maybe harming kids, it may be hard to get bishops. We need to be able to have these policies to make it possible for good people to be bishops, and also for the bishops not to get sued, and for children not to get hurt. This protects the church, it protects children, it protects bishops. It's a win-win. It's a win-win for everybody. And the church is signed up that they want to do it.
So do it.
Let's do it. And if you could you post as part of the show notes some of these links to these other churches like Community of Christ, United Methodist Church has a thing called Safe Sanctuaries. They're great. They got their act together. Episcopal Church, Presbyterian Church, United Church of Christ. I've got the Catholic Diocese of Salt Lake in here. We need to put the Unitarian Universalists in there. Let's put a whole link of it, and there's clearly thing. And if they want to know child abuse professionals that can be part of that thing, reach out to a bunch of them, and we can give you references.
All right, so we'll make sure and ask Cody to include some of the links to some of these other churches in the show notes, so that we can help. All right, well, that ends part 2 of our interview. We've still got about 31 people hanging on. Want to thank those who are hanging on. It's so great to have you. Aaron writes, thank you guys for having this conversation. Marianne writes, if a couple wants privacy, they can sit on chairs against the wall that is closest to the door, no shades. That can go poorly if the bishop is a problem. Jessica writes, I didn't see Jesus doing interviews for baptism or Alma or anyone for that matter. Where did they even get the idea for interviews? So we're grateful for those who are tuning in who have questions or comments. We're grateful for that.